This is a new day. This is a new day full of sound and light and expectation. This day has been waiting for you. This day has been waiting with open arms just for you. This is the day we have been given. Let's not waste it. Come now and let us worship together. Welcome, everybody. My name is Reverend Joseph Boyd, and it is my pleasure, my great pleasure, to welcome you into this sanctuary here at 1105 Elm Street in one of the best cities in the entire world, Youngstown, Ohio. It is a beautiful February day here, and I have the great luxury of being able to see snow and light streaming in through the sanctuary windows. And I have the great joy, actually the greatest joy, of seeing all of you, seeing your faces and seeing your connection with me and with this place all over the world. For over a century, this church has been here on the north side of Youngstown, on the corner of Illinois and Elm, standing in solidarity with the marginalized in this community locally, here in Youngstown, in the Mahoning County area. And given the pandemic, now that mission has gone global and throughout the United States. So I welcome all of you who are joining us from wherever you happen to be sitting, walking, driving, this morning, this evening, this afternoon, whatever time you are in right now. I welcome all our local friends here in the Mahoning County area who have been steady supporters of this church for decades. I welcome all our friends from Trumbull County, from Pennsylvania. We've had many people in the past who drove over an hour to be here, from Hermitage, Meadville. I want to welcome our friends in Columbiana County. I realize I never welcome those friends. All of you are so precious to me. And I welcome all of you across the United States, from California to New York City, down south on the coast of South Carolina, Colorado. I welcome all our friends who happen to be international, who maybe are viewing us now or perhaps later on YouTube in places such as Brazil, the Dominican Republic, Europe. It's amazing, right? Truly a beloved global community. And that is actually the theme this month of February, beloved community. So we're going to be exploring during this service and during every service in February, what does beloved community mean for us in this time, this month, in 2021, and going forward into the future. So I welcome you to join into religious education. If you have any children, there's a link down in the chat box. For age 15 and younger, religious education starts at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And for those 15 to 18 high school age students, it begins at noon. So you'll find that link down in the chat box. We have events happening throughout the week, not just on Sunday morning, and it's open to anyone here who would like to participate. One event that's been ongoing, that's been really lovely, is called Tea for Tuesdays. It's a time to get together and have a cup of tea. It's Tuesday at 4 p.m. this Tuesday, but it's ongoing every Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's Tea for Tuesday with Melissa Smith, where you have a tea from your home and just get to know each other and talk about current events, talk about what's on your heart, talk about what's going on in your life, and just a way to form community, especially important now during this pandemic, that we stay connected to one another. So again, it's called Tea for Tuesdays, this coming Tuesday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, facilitated by Melissa Smith. Feel free to join. She's a lovely host and lovely to talk to, so join into that. And then the next day, Wednesday evening, we have our regular meeting for our worship associates. So you may have noticed that I don't just lead worship completely alone. Often we have somebody else from the congregation who's leading worship with me and crafting that service and even delivering a message, which is what you're going to hear today from Lindsay Sinkovich, one of our worship associates. But you're welcome to join in on this meeting even if you're not a worship associate. If you're interested in worship in general, if you've appreciated what we're doing and have some ideas for what we might do going forward, I welcome you into that conversation. We have a monthly theme each month. As I said, February's theme is Beloved Community. What we're going to discuss this coming Wednesday at 7 p.m. is March's theme of commitment. Commitment. What does it mean to be a people of commitment? So, especially given the new administration and a lot of factors, I think this is a very apt theme. So, if you'd like to join us, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the same Zoom channel, so you can just click in and join us for that. And then on Saturday, February 13th at 10 a.m., there's a program called Anti-Racism at the Crossroads. This has been a program that is building on an event that we had last year in Youngstown in November of 2020, so a few months before the pandemic. And now they're carrying this conversation forward virtually, so now anyone in the country and the world can participate. And this is a partnership with the Ursuline Sisters, the Sisters of the Humility of Mary, in collaboration with Action, which is a group of congregations that get together to do community organizing. And our church is one of those congregations that is a partner church of Action. So you're welcome to join in on that. Again, this is coming Saturday at 10 a.m. There is a separate link for that meeting. So if you'd like to join in, you can contact the office at office@uuyo.org, and we'll send you that separate Zoom link. And now I would like to go to Kelsey Myers in New York City near Marcus Garvey Park, who will deliver our chalice lighting this morning.
Hey everybody, before I get into the chalice lighting, I just want to say how lovely it is to see you all and miss UUYO greatly. And it's a blessing to be here. Within my first month of living in New York City, my roommate Anna mentioned that they were going to a protest in Times Square. While there had been some marches in downtown Youngstown when the Black Lives Matter movement involving the Black Lives Matter movement, for various reasons I hadn't gone to them, though I watched some live streams on Facebook. I asked them if I could come along, and they enthusiastically agreed. Times Square is everything you expect Times Square to be. Huge, loud, perhaps not as packed with people as it would have been pre-COVID, but still pretty crowded. We met up with a group of protesters by the Red Steps, some of whom were designated leaders and conflict mediators. Masks on all of our faces, signs in some of our hands. We walked down the street en masse, chanting. We were chanting for a man who had been shot and killed in his apartment. He had been locked out of his apartment, had been knocking on his neighbor's doors, trying to find someone who could help him get back in. Someone saw the disturbance and called the police. By the time they showed up, he was cooking in his kitchen. The police entered. That was where he was shot, in his own home, making dinner. I remember when the cops showed up to the protest. There was a swarm of them, a huge crowd. I think they may have outnumbered us. We were at the Macy's at East 34th Street downtown, and shoppers were irritated by our presence. The folks in charge of the protest told everyone to clear the street and step onto the sidewalk. And I remember many of the chants, but one of them in particular stood out to me this morning, which was chanted when the police and the conflict mediators began to speak. This is what community looks like. It's protesting, all of us bound together to remember this man's life and death, is what community looks like. In my time in Youngstown, in my time in New York, I've seen all sorts of communities. But I know the true community is the community that welcomes each other in. When I moved into my Harlem apartment, my roommates had no obligation to be my friends, so long as I did my dishes and paid my rent. But they welcomed me into their community. They share their time, their kindness, and their space with me. I've seen them do this with other people. I have seen them bound together. This is what community looks like. And I've seen this at Unitarian churches where strangers are welcomed as friends. When I brought an agnostic friend to UUYO in the middle of my undergrad, she told me, I've never been to a church where the people are so friendly before. This is what community looks like. We light this chalice of the spirit of community and the fire of commitment to each other and to the friends we have yet to make.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. I'm thrilled to have you in our presence this morning. Please join me in reading the covenant. Love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Each month, we give to an organization that supports transformation in our community, which is at the heart of our mission. In our church's historic commitment to the well-being of our community, we give 100% of our offering to those in need. UUYO's Give Away the Plate recipient for February is Black Period. Last year, Black Period established and began to raise funds for a new kind of scholarship at Youngstown State University, the Arlene Floyd Grant and Scholarship Fund. The fund was created to remove the financial challenges that African American students face on campus and that many times become critical barriers to their success. This fund is to help with food in the form of Peak Point cards, transportation needs, books, and other academic supplies, such as housing, storage, childcare, and any other school-related expenses. Black Period founder Carmela Williams said the inspiration for the Arlene Floyd Grant and Scholarship Program was based on the experiences of students she mentored during her 12 years as the assistant director of associate degree and tech prep programs at YSU. She says, I worked with first generation African American students, and I just saw that they had a ton of barriers to face, but didn't really have an official support system at the university that was specifically for them. Black Period was established by Ms. Williams in May 2020 as a response to the murder of George Floyd and renewed demands for racial justice across the country and in the Mahoning Valley. Black Period's mission is to raise funds and inject resources directly into the Black community. Black Period is focused on the advancement of Black people and has identified 3 pillars to engage, support, and promote opportunity, health, and justice for the Black community: economics, wellness, and civic engagement. Black Period also provides tools for white allies as they stand with the Black community against racism and injustice. We will now receive the offering that supports the life of Youngstown, the Mahoning Valley, and our wider world. Good morning, everyone. Speaking of beloved community, I am just very excited to be here with you all today in spirit virtually. Interconnectedness is the first word that comes to mind when I think of beloved community. I think of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from a Birmingham jail. I think about how we are indeed an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. I have lived into King's idea that whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. This includes our thoughts, feelings, words, and actions, and comes down to the way we interact in our everyday life. Actually, in my view, beloved community is not a fantasy far off in the future of a utopia where there truly is liberty and justice for all, nor does it require a mission trip to a far off land. As hopeful as I am for the first, and as grateful as I am for the folks that do the latter, I have found beloved community to be accessible to all in the here and now. Accepting the call to my role in the beloved community has brought about powerful self-transformation in ways that I could have never imagined. Engaging in beloved community reminds me that we all are a work in progress, and that with a commitment to wake up to our interconnected nature, we can all get through the most challenging times and experiences. We can have liberty and justice for all. Staying awake to the fact that we all want to be loved and that we all experience suffering connects us in a transformative and transcendent way. I recently discovered that Dr. King did not coin the phrase beloved community, but rather it's first attributed to late 19th and early 20th century philosopher Josiah Royce, who believed that when groups of humans become, quote, loyal to and coordinate around a common cause, end quote, they are able to get in touch with a divine wisdom. Of course, Dr. King brought this divine wisdom of beloved community into action during the civil rights era, and it is up to us in the 21st century to continue to live our daily lives in ways that can advance this vision. But how can we advance this vision when our nation has failed in response to a pandemic, costing hundreds of thousands of lives unnecessarily, when half of our country is doubling down on white supremacy, when 1 in 7 children in our country aren't sure where their next meal is coming from? Advancing this vision has seemed like quite an impossible mission lately, but we cannot lose heart. Through staying in beloved community for me has at once been the simplest and most challenging act. I've come to know beloved community as something in the here and now that is less of a final destination and more of a lifelong practice. I liken this to planting seeds and maintaining a garden of which I may never reap the full harvest. But nonetheless, I have faith that my disciplined work will yield benefit to more than just myself. For me, beloved community has meant that I live my life not only to reduce my own suffering, but to do everything I can to reduce suffering for others. Ultimately, I find beloved community to be anchored in faith. I find it something larger than ourselves, connecting us all to divine wisdom. While I aspire to Reverend Shirley Strong's definition of beloved community, which has its roots in the works of Jesus, the Buddha, Gandhi, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., et al., as, quote, an inclusive, interrelated society based on love, justice, compassion, responsibility, shared power, and a respect for all people, places, and things, a society that radically transforms individuals and restructures institutions. I have also become aware that this is not some far-off dream to hope for, This is not something that can only be attained by revoking all materialism and living as an ascetic. Beloved community occurs organically when we make a commitment to have faith, to stay awake with love and compassion for ourselves and others in the face of the impossible. This is not to say that I have not been utterly discouraged and on the verge of giving up all hope. Most recently, from November 2016 to present, I have felt tested by what seemed like an abject failure of humanity. However, one essential aspect to a beloved community is that it is not without conflict. One idea that I've read in bell hooks writings is that at points in history, social justice movements for civil rights struggles, power movements, and feminist movements have collapsed at times because conflicts between groups were seen as too negative. But as Hooks has also said, quote, "The truth is that you can't build community without conflict," end quote. While conflict is necessary, if you believe in people on both sides of the conflict as inherently good and capable of redemption, then there can be a commitment to moving towards resolving conflict and rebuilding community. Though we may be far off from any ideal world, this belief in redemption can help move us towards a better understanding of ourselves and each other. This theory has tested me in the classroom setting over the past 2 decades, but most acutely in 2016 and also this academic year. I teach in a community where parents and students largely supported our former president and all the gamut of misinformation and lies that he spread. Because I designed my courses in English 9, 10, 11, and 12 around the humanities and current events, we often have classroom discussions based on controversial issues, and students were quickly able to figure out that I was not a fan of 45. During the 2016 presidential election, a colleague thought it would be a clever idea to stage a mock election and to print out Trump and Hillary masks. This was all fun and games till I walked into my classroom on November 9th, 2016, to a sea of students clad in Trump masks. I remember being truly nauseated, but also felt called to gently show them the error of their ways through compassion and rigorous units of study. This really forced me to put my beliefs in the first principle of our faith, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Fast forward to summer of 2020. My belief in the first principle was once again brought to the fore, along with the second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Essential to my survival this academic year was my belief in these principles, first toward myself, so that I could project them outwardly. Deeply haunted by an in-person return to school, I had nightmarish visions of the students in Trump masks. And speaking of masks, I had even more horrendous visions that I was going to be forced into an unsafe work environment where students would not be required to be masked, or if they were, would not follow the procedures. My nightmares were close to being confirmed when I went to prep my classroom and observed staff members walking around unmasked, shaking hands, and discussing how this would all be over soon. However, I stayed true to the inherent dignity principle and realized that I had a right to a safe work environment. Luckily, I found 2 other colleagues that were invested in safety for all, and we fiercely advocated for plexiglass barriers, social distancing, and especially that the masking mandate for schools would be enforced as a zero tolerance policy for all staff and students. Since I literally felt like my life was on the line, I was not afraid to speak up. When I saw colleagues walking around the halls with their masks below their nose, or even worse, the chin beard look. Then when students returned in the fall to 4 days in-person instruction, the mask wearing began to get lax again. In every effort to remain compassionate in the face of students coming to school wrapped in Trump 2020 flags with their noses free to everyone's view. I did feel like losing hope many a day. This year has been grueling and genuinely made me reflect on a career change, but that's another story. I continued to strongly enforce the mask policy in my classroom, but observed that it wasn't being followed consistently in other areas of the building. Then I started to realize some of my more rationally minded students were refusing to mask properly. Finally, this came to a boiling point when one of my brightest students began to refuse masking in my classroom. This student and I have a mostly good rapport, though we have had some conflicts in journalism class after I refused to publish a story presenting right-wing conspiracy as news. Since she belongs to one of the more prominent families in the community, she felt that it was her right to not mask in my class. And one day she outright refused to pull it up over her mouth and nose. I was beside myself and really was just flat out exhausted from being the mask police day in and day out. But my obligation was and is to create a safe learning environment. She was combative when I asked her to pull up her mask. I stayed compassionate and let her know that I had nothing personal against her and that, as a matter of fact, she was one of my best writers. However, she had a choice to either mask up or go talk to the principal. She chose the latter. I was in turmoil that I had sent one of my highest achieving students to the office, but had a clear conscience about my decision. To shorten this long mask saga, I will say that the student apologized to me and has since shown me much respect. She has shared with me and others that despite our disagreements on political views, she feels that she has benefited from being in my classroom and has told me that I've helped her more than I will ever know. Since I have her in my journalism and creative writing classes, we have the opportunity to share many respectful debates. I'm thrilled that I was able to provide a beloved community where students feel safe to try out their voices, even if they don't agree with one another. In my opinion, this is the best lesson I could possibly teach in preparing them for life after high school. In the past, I've mistaken the concept of beloved community for a more utopian-like vision, a vision to hope for and aspire to, one that might not be possible in our time. My experiences have proved that this is not a future vision. My experiences have proved that the key to beloved community is to believe that it is here and now. I've found that this concept starts with the self and ripples out to family, work, church, interacting with strangers in our communities, our nation, and all over our planet. To do this, we must stay awake and open-hearted with love and compassion through even the worst suffering. I know this is a crazy and radical idea. Who wants to suffer? I'm not suggesting that we become martyrs and saints, or even that suffering has some grand and glorified purpose, because sometimes we suffer in unspeakable ways without purpose or explanation. Sometimes we suffer and there is no grand reward on the other side, just suffering. Therein lies our connectedness, though. I think in order to actively engage in beloved community is to realize that we all suffer. I also caution that from experience, I've learned that complacency and clinging to comfort actually results in even more suffering. It is precisely because we all suffer that I feel that we can enhance beloved community. Though I cannot possibly solve every personal, social, and political issue we are facing right now, I am invested in finding a way forward. It is crucial to remember that we are all flawed and we may stumble, but I suggest that we must have faith in beloved community to see us through. For a lifetime, I've been learning experientially about a Buddhist term that connects us to beloved community. It is only recently that I learned the term bodhicitta. Bodhi meaning awake, enlightened, or completely open. Citta meaning mind, and also heart or attitude. I have internalized this concept as completely open heart. Bodhicitta is a gateway, not only to reducing our own suffering, but ultimately allowing us to follow through on the visions brought to us by those like Josiah Royce and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This experience over the past year has been terrifying and beautiful. I've laughed and I've wept. I've had COVID scares. I've become burned out and reinvigorated. I've come to know that engaging in a beloved community allows space for healing. And because I choose to stay awake with an open heart, because I choose to stay present with bodhicitta, I allow space for others to experience healing. In closing, I leave you with some wise words of Pema Chodron from her book, When Things Fall Apart, Heart Advice for Difficult Times, to inspire and sustain you and to motivate you to have faith in beloved community, especially when things fall apart and seem unnavigable. First, consider this, quote, "Things falling apart is a kind of testing and also a kind of healing. We think that the point is to pass the test or to overcome the problem. But the truth is that things don't really get solved. They come together and fall apart. It's just like that. The healing comes from letting there be room for all this to happen, room for grief, for relief, for misery, for joy." And finally, quote, "Every day we think about the aggression in the world in New York, Los Angeles, Halifax, Taiwan, Beirut, Kuwait, Somalia, Iraq, everywhere. All over the world, everybody always strikes out at the enemy, and the pain escalates forever. Every day we could reflect on this and ask ourselves, am I going to add to the aggression in the world? Every day at the moment when things get edgy, we can just ask ourselves, am I going to practice peace or am I going to war?" Thank you.
And now we're going to practice bodhicitta, awakening the heart mind. It's very simple. Just notice your breath and your body, whatever you're doing, if you're sitting or lying down or walking. Another way of thinking about this is a practice of beloved community. You know, feeling in our breath and holding in our heart every person in the screen, whether we see their face or not, and every person in this world, whether we see their face or know them or not, all in this breath, breathing us and making us who we are. So let's do that for a few moments.
A reading. This is a poem entitled "A New National Anthem" by Ada Limon. The truth is, I've never cared for the national anthem. If you think about it, it's not a good song. Too high for most of us with the rocket's red glare, and then there are the bombs. Always, always, there is war and bombs. Once I sang it at homecoming and threw even the tenacious high school band off key. But the song didn't mean anything, just a call to the field, something to get through before the pummeling of youth. And what of the stanzas we could never sing? The third that mentions no refuge could save the hireling and the slave? Perhaps the truth is, every song of this country has an unsung third stanza, something brutal snaking underneath us as we blindly sing the high notes with a beer sloshing in the stands, hoping our team wins. Don't get me wrong, I do like the flag, how it undulates in the wind like water, elemental, and best when it's humbled, brought to its knees, clung to by someone who has lost everything. When it's not a weapon, when it flickers, when it folds up so perfectly, you can keep it until it's needed, until you can love it again, until the song in your mouth feels like sustenance, a song where the notes are sung by even the ageless woods, the short grass plains, the Red River Gorge, the fistful of land left unpoisoned. That song, that's our birthright, that's sung in silence when it's too hard to go on. That sounds like someone's rough fingers weaving into another's. That sounds like a match being lit in an endless cave. The song that says, my bones are your bones, and your bones are my bones. And isn't that enough?
Able to hear me okay? Okay. I love the interaction. I was thinking this past week about when Jennifer and we traveled to Transylvania. I think it was about 3 years ago during the summertime. And we traveled to this remote village in the Homer Road Valley. And it was a place where our guide said there's what he called a grouping of Unitarian villages. And it was incredible. You could actually stand on a hill, and in every single village, you just saw one white steeple. And you could see the pointed steeple in all these villages, just one church in every single village. And our guide told us that one church was a Unitarian church, the only church available in each and every single one of these villages in Transylvania, in the Homer Road Valley. I was really interested in wanting to go to worship service at one of these Sunday services. And so we drove to actually one of the most remote villages we could find in the Homer Road Valley. It was so remote that eventually, as we were driving in our rental car, the pavement began to turn to gravel, and then the gravel eventually turned into mud. And then the mud eventually led us to unmarked streets, where we basically had to use a compass to find out where this village is, because there was no street signs or anything. So church is very traditional in Transylvania. So I dressed that morning in a suit and tie, and when we arrived at what I thought was the village, I rolled up my suit legs so I wouldn't get mud all over my suit. And I felt kind of ridiculous. And I happened to see an older woman who was outside in her garden. And I, using my Hungarian translation book, asked her in my very broken Hungarian if the church was open yet. And she responded in Hungarian, which I could not understand at all. And she just pointed and said, that way. And so I walked with my pant legs rolled up in my suit and tie with Jennifer. And we walked to the only white steeple church in the village. And it was about 15 minutes until service began. And so I thought, well, there's got to be people in this church surely by now. And I went to open the door, and it was locked. And I thought, that's odd. And we waited there for maybe just a couple minutes, thinking somebody eventually would come. And eventually someone did. And we looked up the road, and I saw a man in a suit and tie with a Bible under his arm. And I went up to meet him. And I said, "Hello, my name is Joseph. I'm an American, and I'm here visiting." And he said, "I know. I know you are an American." And we walked, and as we walked to the church, quite slowly actually, I asked him what he was going to be preaching on. And he said he was going to be preaching on the Apostle Paul, who was under house arrest. And I said, "Great." And he mirrored back to me in a very kind but kind of mocking way, "Great." And we went to the church, and he had the key and opened it up. And I walked inside the church, and it was completely dark and beautiful. And on the right was a Hungarian flag that was waving. And this was notable because the village actually was in Romania, not Hungary. And Leoj, the minister who walked us there, said that flag was placed there during communism and has been waving there ever since. Still, nobody was in the church, so Jennifer and I took a seat in a pew. And I watched Leoj do what I do every single Sunday. He took off his suit jacket, he put on his black robe and his stole, and in that moment I saw our connection, our shared heritage to a Protestant tradition in 16th century that began for us in our faith with Francis de Vide, a Catholic priest who preached that there is one God, and thus started the Unitarian movement in Hungary that eventually traveled to England and then eventually to the United States, influencing the founders of this country and every stratosphere of class and society since that day. I saw him put on his black robe and his stole without any pretense, but with a respectability. And I saw him place his Bible on his pulpit. and I saw him just sit down next to it. And still, nobody was there, just Jennifer and myself. And right on time, immediately when service started, about 5 or 6 elderly people from the village came into the church and sat in what it seemed to me like the pew they had always sat in. It looked like they just knew where to go, made a beeline for it. And Leoj led the whole service in Hungarian. And after the service was over, he greeted each of the 5 or 6 parishioners that had attended, wishing them well. It seemed like through the body language, they were speaking in Hungarian. And then he sat next to Jennifer and I in a pew. And I commented, I said, you know, I knew this was a very remote village, and I could tell that Leoj spoke English. And I said, I didn't think many Americans would come to this place. And he said, they always come. I said, really? He said, yes, the last 2 presidents of your denomination in America, the Unitarian Universalist Association, have traveled up this mud road to see me here at this church. And I said, really? I said, I happen to know one of those presidents personally, Bill Singford, who was my minister in Portland, Oregon. And he said, oh yes, Bill, he sat over there in that pew, and just pointed to a pew less than 10 feet away from us. Leoj then took us back to his home and introduced us to his wife, Katerina, who immediately greeted us in English and said, come, we're going to have lunch soon. Sit down. So we sat down and had some food together. I was falsely assuming that their English wouldn't be very good, living in a very remote village of Transylvania with less than 50 Hungarian families. And I was wrong. Completely wrong. Both Katerina and Leoj had studied in Berkeley, California. And Leoj told me that he was actually offered a pulpit in Berkeley, California for a Hungarian-speaking congregation, but turned it down so that he could come and, what he said, preserve Unitarianism in this region the best he could. He said after communism went away and Western Europe was opened up, all the young people from the farming villages went to Western Europe seeking economic opportunity. And he felt that Unitarianism might be lost in that region within a generation unless it was preserved in some way. Katerina told me that she read voraciously in English and that she had constant deliveries from Amazon to their house of various books in English so that she could keep herself engaged. I imagined all these Amazon trucks getting stuck in the mud, trying to give Katerina her books in English. After we were done having lunch, Leoj asked me if I would like to go climb the lookout tower so I could have a better view of all the Unitarian villages in the area. And I said, sure. And then he mirrored back again in a very kind but almost mocking way, sure. And then Jennifer, who caught on to it, said, oh boy. And Jennifer said, yes, he is indeed an American. Very sincere. So why am I sharing with you this story? I've shared basically versions of this story with some of you when I returned from Transylvania. And the reason why I'm sharing it with you this morning is because I've thought a lot, actually, about Katerina and Leoj, especially during pandemic. And I've been thinking about the nature of beloved community. A beloved community that actually is a global community and one that we can experience in the here and now where we are, affecting each other's lives in ways we might never know. I'm thinking of the 5 or 6 people that Leoj thought he was preaching to, and us, Jennifer and I. And now I've shared that story with all of you and countless others who have traveled up that muddy road to see Katerina and Leoj have shared that story with countless others. And I've been thinking how now Katerina and Leoge are also here with us this morning, here with all of you, even though they are living in a remote village in the Homerode Valley of Transylvania. And I've been thinking of the opportunity, especially during this time with technology, to live out a vision of beloved community, a community where all feel that they are beloved, a community where all feel that they belong, a community where we understand that what happens in any corner of the earth impacts the entire earth. A vision of beloved community that mirrors back who we are in our context, and yet still reaches out and builds a bridge to another context, and sees that these are not two places, but one place that is connected to each other. So I have a proposition for you all this morning, and I want to hear your honest response. Right now, there are various churches, Unitarian churches and Unitarian Universalist churches throughout the world that are looking for a U.S. partner church in America. I actually looked at the partner church page. There are churches and schools in India. There are at least 2 or 3 churches in the Philippines. There are churches in Transylvania as well as Hungary that are seeking to form relationships via technology, through FaceTime, through Skype, with a U.S. partner church, with the goal of deepening our sense of our faith tradition and learning about each other's culture, learning about each other's language, learning about ourselves as Americans in this context through an international perspective, through relationship. And my proposition is this: do we want to do that? Do we want to do that as a church here at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Youngstown, Ohio? It is very doable to do, especially now through technology, and especially now during the pandemic when so many of us are just plugged into technology almost throughout the entire day. So that's my ask. Do we want to do this? Does this interest you? Does this resonate with you as part of the work of beloved community? Understanding that making a connection to a community that feels like it's on the other side of the world actually is part of our world, where we're living, where we are. If we want to do it, it's very doable. And I welcome your responses during the talk back and beyond if this is something that really interests you and you'd like to know more about. Please pray with me. Spirit of love, we come to you this morning with a yearning for beloved community. We come to you this morning knowing the history of this country with all its bloodshed, racism, and possibility. We come to you offering our prayer from the poet that was read this morning, that we may see that my bones are your bones, and your bones are my bones, across this world. And isn't that enough? May we feel in our bones the connection of the entire globe right where we are in this moment. And may we, with full appreciation, take care of that connection with tenderness and curiosity, with humility, and a yearning for growth and beauty. All this we pray. Amen.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. Those we keep in our hearts until we meet again.
As you depart, please remember the one great fact. You are loved and never truly alone. All right. Now we can open it up, Lola and Andy. And for anyone who would like to share